They say weddings bring families together, but in my case, it tore mine apart in the most humiliating way imaginable. One moment, I was sitting at my stepdaughter's rehearsal dinner, surrounded by laughter and celebration. The next, she was standing in front of 100 guests, raising her glass, and announcing to the world that I was nothing more than an unwanted outsider. Let's be honest, this woman is not my family. She never was, and she never will be. The words cut through the air like a blade, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. My husband sat frozen beside me, his face drained of color. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and as my stepdaughter's cruel smile widened, I realized this wasn't a heat-of-the-moment outburst. This was planned. Deliberate, a calculated move to destroy me in front of everyone I cared about. But if she thought I would just sit there and take it, she was dead wrong. Because what she didn't know was that I had been keeping a secret of my own. And before this wedding was over, I would make sure that everyone knew the truth about the girl who tried to ruin me. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. The way Chloe's resentment simmered beneath the surface. The way her words always carried an edge when she spoke to me. The way she deliberately excluded me from moments that should have been shared as a family. But at the time, I convinced myself that it was just growing pains, just a phase. After all, losing a mother is a wound that never truly heals. I thought that if I gave her time, space, and unwavering support, she would eventually come around. I was wrong. The first time I met Chloe, she was 14, sullen, guarded, and grieving. I had just married Mark, stepping into a home that still carried the presence of her late mother. Diane, I never intended to replace her. I never even tried. I only wanted to be someone she could count on. Someone she could turn to when the weight of her loss felt unbearable. But from the moment I walked through that door, Chloe made one thing painfully clear: she didn't want me there. At first, it was subtle, a polite but distant demeanor, carefully measured responses, the way she would nod when I spoke but never truly engage. Mark assured me it was normal, that she just needed time. So I waited. I helped with her school projects, attended her recitals, left small notes of encouragement on her desk. But nothing I did could chip away at the wall she had built between us. And when Vanessa, Diane's sister, entered the picture, things only got worse. Vanessa had always been overprotective of Chloe, but after Diane's passing, she became something else entirely. She positioned herself as Chloe's real maternal figure, whispering poisonous words into her ear whenever she got the chance. Your father moved on too quickly. Julia isn't here for you. She's here for him. Don't let her take your mother's place. It wasn't long before I felt the shift. Chloe started pulling away, not just from me, but from Mark too. By the time she left for college, the distance between us had solidified into something unbreakable. The calls home became less frequent. And when she did visit, she barely acknowledged my presence. The warmth she once shared with her father had also faded, replaced by indifference and short, clipped conversations. Mark refused to see it, brushing it off as typical young adult behavior. But I knew better. I could feel it in my bones. Chloe wasn't just distant. She was angry, and that anger had a source. It all became clear the summer before her senior year, when I overheard a conversation she didn't mean for me to hear. She was on the phone with Vanessa, pacing the backyard, her voice sharp and bitter. She thinks she can just slide into our lives and take over. God, she's pathetic. And Dad? He's completely blind to it. But don't worry, I have a plan. She's not going to get away with this. The words sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just resentment. This was something darker, something calculated. From that moment on, Chloe no longer hid her disdain. She turned every family gathering into a battlefield, twisting conversations, making snide remarks just quiet enough for only me to hear. If I made dinner, she wasn't hungry. If I offered to help with anything, she had it covered. If I so much as breathed in the wrong direction, I became the villain in her story. Mark tried to intervene, but Chloe had mastered the art of manipulation. Whenever he confronted her, she would tilt her head, let her eyes well up just enough to seem wounded, and say something like, "Dad, I just miss Mom. Can't you see that?" And just like that, the conversation would end. He would let it go. Afraid to push her too hard. Afraid to lose her. By the time she graduated, I had resigned myself to the idea that things might never change. But then, she met Daniel. Daniel was everything Chloe had always wanted: wealthy, successful, and, most importantly, completely unaware of the fractures in our family. She painted herself as the perfect daughter, the dutiful young woman who had gracefully endured the loss of her mother and welcomed me into her life. It was a lie so polished that even I almost believed it. And when they got engaged, she saw it as the perfect opportunity to re-establish control, to erase me from the picture entirely. The wedding planning was an endless string of exclusion. She made decisions with Mark but never once consulted me. She scheduled fittings and tastings on days she knew I was busy. She even went as far as to send the save the dates to everyone except me, only forwarding my invitation after Mark questioned her about it. But the final blow came when she announced that Vanessa, not me, would be the one to walk her down the aisle. I should have said something. I should have confronted her. Should have told Mark exactly what was happening. But I stayed silent, thinking that maybe, just maybe, if I let her have this moment, things could finally start to heal. I had no idea what she had planned for the rehearsal dinner. Before I tell you what happened next, the moment that left an entire banquet hall in stunned silence, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to rewrite the truth to suit their own version of events? Let me know in the comments. And if you've ever had to fight for what's right, hit that like button, because trust me, this story is just getting started. The morning after the rehearsal dinner, I woke up with a sinking feeling in my stomach, as if the humiliation of last night had taken root deep inside me. The weight of Chloe's words still lingered, and no matter how much Mark tried to reassure me that she had only spoken out of anger, I knew better. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was calculated, and I had a terrible feeling that she wasn't finished. That feeling solidified when I checked my inbox and saw an email from the principal of the high school where I had worked for the last 10 years. The subject line made my breath hitch. Urgent. Allegations of misconduct. My vision blurred as I scanned through the email. It was vague but serious. Someone had accused me of inappropriate behavior with a student. No name, no details, just the chilling announcement that an investigation was underway. For a moment, the world around me seemed to tilt. I had worked too hard, built my reputation on trust and integrity. I had dedicated years to helping my students, earning their respect, mentoring them, supporting them through difficult times. And now, just like that, it was all being called into question. It didn't take long for my mind to piece it together. Chloe, I stormed into the kitchen, my phone clutched tightly in my hand, where Mark was casually making coffee as if the world hadn't just collapsed around me. My voice came out sharp, barely controlled as I placed my phone on the counter in front of him. Read it. Mark glanced at me with confusion before his eyes landed on the screen. His face paled instantly as he read the email. This has to be a mistake, he stammered. I let out a bitter laugh. A mistake? You really think this is a coincidence? That the morning after Chloe humiliates me in front of an entire room of people, I suddenly get accused of something that could end my career? Mark rubbed his temples, his expression pained. Julia, I know she's upset, but I can't believe she would do something like this. Well, believe it. My voice shook, but not from fear, from rage. You saw what she did last night. You heard her. That wasn't some emotional outburst. That was a planned attack. And now she's trying to take it even further. Mark exhaled deeply, his jaw tightening. He wanted to believe Chloe was still the daughter he once knew. But deep down, even he couldn't deny the pattern anymore. But knowing wasn't enough. I needed proof. The rest of the day, I pored over everything I could remember, searching for any clue, any misstep that might lead me to the truth. And then, like a sudden spark in the dark, a memory surfaced. 2 weeks ago, while Chloe had been visiting, I had walked past her in the living room, catching a glimpse of her phone screen. She had been texting someone, and the moment she noticed me, she locked her phone and shoved it under a pillow. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Young adults were private with their conversations. But now, I was certain it had something to do with what was happening. I began to dig, scrolling through social media. I searched for any connection Chloe might have to someone who could help her pull off something like this. And then I found him. Ryan. Ryan was an old acquaintance of hers. Someone with a reputation for bending the rules when it suited him. He wasn't just a troublemaker, he was the type of person who would do anything for the right price. My stomach twisted as I looked through his posts. Something about this felt right in the worst possible way. It took me an hour of searching before I found the link I needed. An old thread where he had jokingly mentioned being a master of fake receipts. Fake receipts. My blood ran cold. This was it. I reached out to a former colleague of mine, someone who had once been involved in cybersecurity, and asked if there was a way to verify whether messages could have been falsified. His response was immediate: yes. But it depends on how they were made. If it's done sloppily, there are ways to trace manipulation. That was all I needed. I continued digging, looking for anything that would tie Chloe to Ryan directly. Then, by sheer luck, I stumbled upon a photo Chloe had posted weeks ago. She was at a coffee shop. And in the background, just barely visible in the reflection of a window, was Ryan. They had met in person. The realization made my stomach churn. This wasn't just a baseless attack. Chloe had gone to someone who specialized in creating fake digital evidence. And now she was using it against me. A rush of fury surged through me. She thought she could get away with this. That I would sit back, too broken to fight back. She was wrong. The realization that Chloe had set me up didn't paralyze me. It ignited something inside me. I had spent years walking on eggshells around her, bending over backward to prove that I wasn't trying to replace her mother. I had tolerated the cold shoulders, the passive-aggressive remarks, the manipulative attempts to turn Mark against me. But this was different. This wasn't just cruelty. This was war. And if Chloe thought I was going to sit back and let her dismantle my life, she had severely underestimated me. I knew I needed hard evidence, something undeniable, something that would make even Mark see her for who she really was. I already had my first clue: Ryan. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. If Chloe had gone to him for help, she had left a trail. She was arrogant, too confident in her ability to control the narrative, and that would be her downfall. I decided to reach out to Ryan directly. If he was the weak link in her plan, I was going to exploit it. I found his contact information through an old alumni group from their university. It took me a few tries, but eventually, he answered my call. His voice was guarded, but there was something else there too: nervousness. I wasted no time. I told him I knew about the fake messages. I told him I had screenshots of him and Chloe together just a few weeks ago. And then I dropped the real bombshell. I had a friend in law enforcement who would be very interested in what I had uncovered. That was all it took. Ryan cracked. He admitted everything. Chloe had approached him weeks ago, offering him a hefty sum to create fake screenshots implicating me in a scandal. She had told him she wanted to scare me off and make sure I was too ashamed to show my face at the wedding. But when the fabricated messages ended up in my employer's inbox, even Ryan had realized she had gone too far. She said she just wanted you gone. He confessed. I didn't think she'd actually try to ruin your life. I forced myself to stay calm. Do you still have the original messages she sent you? There was a pause. Then, a resigned sigh. Yeah, he admitted. I never delete anything. That was all I needed. Within minutes, he forwarded me everything: texts, payment receipts, even a voice memo Chloe had sent him laughing about how this would finally put that woman in her place. As I listened to it, my hands tightened into fists. I had proof. I could have gone straight to Mark with it right then and there. I could have confronted Chloe in private, given her the chance to confess before everything unraveled publicly. But then I thought about the years of lies, the manipulation, the way she had humiliated me in front of a room full of people who once respected me. No, she wanted an audience? She was going to get one. I spent the next 24 hours preparing. I sent copies of the evidence to my lawyer, ensuring that no matter what happened, my name would be cleared with the school board. Then, I made arrangements with someone who had the power to completely shatter Chloe's carefully crafted persona, her fiancé. Daniel. Daniel had always been polite to me, but distant. Chloe had painted him a perfect picture of our family dynamic, one where she was the victim and I was the villain. That was about to change. I sent him a message, asking him to meet me in private before the wedding ceremony. When he hesitated, I added, "This is about Chloe. There's something you need to see before you make the biggest mistake of your life." That got his attention. We met at a small cafe near the venue. When I handed him my phone and let him read the messages for himself, I watched his face shift from confusion to horror to outright fury. She did this," he muttered, shaking his head. "She actually did this?" I nodded, letting the weight of it sink in. This is who she really is. Daniel. And if she's willing to go this far to destroy me, imagine what she'll do to you when things don't go her way. He didn't say anything for a long time. When he finally looked up, there was a steely resolve in his eyes. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "I know exactly what I need to do." And just like that, the stage was set. I arrived at the venue an hour before the ceremony, my heart pounding but my determination unwavering. The guests were already gathering, unaware that they were about to witness the wedding unravel before it even began. Mark was there too, his expression weary. He had sensed the tension but still held on to hope that today would be a fresh start. Poor fool. When the ceremony was just about to start, the doors opened, and Chloe made her grand entrance in a flowing white gown. She was glowing, completely unaware that this day, her perfect day, was about to come crashing down. And I was going to enjoy every second of it. The moment Chloe stepped into the ceremony hall, the air shifted. She walked with confidence, her designer gown flowing behind her, her smile radiant. She had no idea that within minutes, everything she had built, her reputation, her relationship, her future, was about to collapse around her. I took my seat near the front, my pulse steady despite the storm brewing inside me. Mark sat beside me, oblivious to the impending disaster. Daniel stood at the altar, his face a mask of unreadable emotion. But I saw it, the tightness in his jaw, the way his hands clenched at his sides. He was ready. As the music swelled and the officiant prepared to begin, Daniel took a deep breath. Then, with a voice that cut through the hushed whispers of the crowd, he spoke. "There won't be a wedding today." Gasps rippled through the room. Chloe froze mid-step, her perfect smile faltering. The guests looked around in confusion, murmurs rising in waves. Mark sat up straighter beside me, his eyes darting between Daniel and his daughter. Chloe let out a nervous laugh. "Daniel, what are you talking about? This isn't funny." But Daniel wasn't laughing. He turned to face the audience, his voice calm but firm. "I found out something last night," he continued, "something that made me realize I can't marry this woman." His eyes locked onto Chloe's, and in that moment, I saw it, the first flicker of fear in her gaze. "Because she's not the person she pretends to be." Chloe took a step forward, her fingers trembling at her sides. "Daniel, stop. Let's talk about this privately." "No," he said, his voice sharp. "We're not doing this behind closed doors. You had no problem humiliating someone else in front of an audience. So now, it's your turn." A stunned silence followed. Mark stiffened beside me. I could feel his breath hitch, the unspoken question forming in his mind. "What are you talking about?" he finally asked, his voice laced with unease. Daniel inhaled deeply, then pulled out his phone. "I have proof that Chloe fabricated an entire scandal just to destroy her stepmother." His voice was steady, unwavering. "She hired someone to create fake screenshots and then used them to try to get Julia fired. She planned all of it." The room erupted in gasps. Chloe's face drained of color. "That's not true," she shrieked, her voice cracking under the pressure. "Daniel, someone's lying to you. This is insane." But Daniel wasn't finished. He turned the phone toward the crowd and pressed play. Chloe's own voice filled the hall. "This will finally put that woman in her place." The recording echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Murmurs turned into horrified whispers. I watched as realization dawned on the faces around us, her friends, her family, people who had known her since childhood. They weren't looking at her with admiration anymore. They were looking at her with disgust. "No, no, no," Chloe muttered, her hands flying to her temples as if she could physically block out the words. That's not me. Someone faked that. It's not real. But Daniel had more. He scrolled through messages, her conversations with Ryan, proof of payments she had made, receipts, voice notes, everything laid out in irrefutable detail. Mark's hands gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles white. Chloe, he breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. Tell me this isn't true. Chloe turned to him, her eyes wild with desperation. Dad, but she had nothing. There was no explanation, no way to twist this in her favor. Tears welled in her eyes. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic. Of realization. She had lost. Mark's face hardened. He stood up, stepping away from her as if the distance could erase his disappointment. I don't even know who you are anymore, he said. Chloe reached for him, her voice breaking. Dad, please, you have to believe me. But he shook his head. I believed you for years. And look where that got me. A heavy silence settled over the room. No one came to her defense. Not her friends, not her family, even Vanessa, her lifelong supporter, sat stone-faced, unwilling to attach herself to Chloe's sinking ship. And then, the final blow. Daniel turned to the officiant. This wedding is over. Then he looked at Chloe one last time. His voice like steel. And so are we. The words shattered whatever composure she had left. Chloe let out a strangled sob, shaking her head violently. No, you don't mean that. You're just mad. But Daniel had already stepped away. His decision final. Chloe looked around wildly, searching for an ally, someone, anyone, but all she saw were judgmental stares and shaking heads. For the first time in her life, she was truly alone. The room was deathly silent as Daniel walked away, leaving her standing there in her pristine white dress, surrounded by the wreckage of her own making. And as I watched her crumble, I felt something I never thought I would: peace. The aftermath of Chloe's downfall was swift and merciless. The once glamorous wedding venue now felt like a crime scene. The weight of her exposed lies lingering in the air. Guests whispered as they left, shaking their heads, exchanging knowing glances. Some looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and admiration. Others simply avoided Chloe altogether, unwilling to be associated with her disgrace. Mark stood in the middle of it all, his expression hollow. He had spent years defending his daughter, dismissing every red flag, convincing himself that her cruelty was just grief, just immaturity. But now, faced with undeniable proof of who she had become, all he could do was stare at the wreckage. Chloe, still in her wedding dress, sank into a chair at the front of the venue, her hands shaking. She had gone silent, her voice stolen by the gravity of her own actions. It was over, and she knew it. Vanessa approached her, the same aunt who had spent years feeding her resentment, whispering poison into her ear. For a moment, I expected her to console Chloe, to offer her the unwavering support she always had. But instead, she only sighed and muttered, I warned you not to take it this far. Then, without another word, she walked away. That was the final betrayal. Chloe's head snapped up, her eyes burning with fresh panic. Wait, Vanessa, please. But she was already gone. One by one, the people she thought she could count on abandoned her, realizing that she wasn't the victim in this story. And then, there was Mark. Chloe turned to him, her voice cracking. Dad, please. You can't just leave me like this. But Mark's eyes, filled with years of disappointment, told her everything she needed to know. Chloe, he said quietly, shaking his head, I don't even know how to fix this. She reached for him, but he took a step back. And that was when it truly hit her. For the first time in her life, there was no one left to clean up her mess. No one left to blame. As I watched her sit there, drowning in the consequences of her own actions, I felt no satisfaction, only relief. For so long, I had fought for a place in this family, bending over backward to prove my worth. But in the end, I didn't have to. The truth had done all the work for me. In the days that followed, the fallout continued. Daniel cut off all contact, refusing to take Chloe's calls or respond to her desperate messages. Word spread quickly, and soon, even the people who had once admired her started to distance themselves. Then came the financial consequences. With the wedding cancelled, deposits were lost, vendors demanded payment, and Chloe found herself drowning in debt. When she turned to Mark for help, expecting him to cover the damages, his response was simple: "You made this mess. You fix it." That was when she realized she had lost him. 2. As for me, my name was cleared. The fabricated scandal Chloe had tried to use against me unraveled. And with Ryan's confession, my job was never in danger. But more than that, I had something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Mark and I took time to rebuild what Chloe had nearly destroyed. It wasn't easy, but for the first time, he saw things clearly. He saw me, not as an outsider, not as an obstacle standing between him and his daughter, but as the person who had stood by him despite everything. One afternoon, weeks after the wedding that never was, I found myself standing by the window, watching the rain as it trickled down the glass. Mark came up behind me, his arms wrapping around my shoulders. "She called again today," he murmured. I didn't need to ask what she had said. It was the same every time. Desperate apologies, hollow promises to change, attempts to manipulate her way back into his good graces. "And?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "I told her I needed time." I nodded, knowing that time wouldn't change what had happened. Some wounds don't heal, no matter how much someone wants them to. But for the first time, I wasn't carrying the burden alone. And that was enough. This story isn't just about betrayal or revenge, it's a lesson in truth, consequences, and resilience. It proves that no matter how well someone manipulates a situation, the truth will always surface in the end. Chloe built a life on deception, but in the end, she became the victim of her own lies. Meanwhile, Julia stood firm, refused to be a victim, and ultimately reclaimed the justice she deserved. Now, I want to hear from you. If you liked this story, comment number 2. And if you didn't, comment number 7. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoy stories like this and subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on more gripping content. Thanks for watching, and remember, the truth always finds a way out.